Hey guys, here in the fur shed. I recently put together an article on trappingtoday.com about fur handling equipment that trappers commonly use. So I thought it would be a good supplement to that article to have some visuals and just kind of go through a video and describe some of those things. So this is just showing the common tools that I use while I'm working at fur. It's not necessarily the right or wrong stuff to use. Whatever works for you works for you. I mean, some people have the newest top of the line, perfect everything that comes like straight from F&T catalog. Other guys, I know a guy that uses a carved out piece of a moose bone to flesh pelts. So you could use just about anything as long as it gets the job done. So I got a list here and I got some things here on the table that I'm just going to go through and kind of describe and let you know what I use and what works. So maybe if you're just getting started, it might give you some hints and ideas on what you might want to pick up. So the first thing is I use multiple knives when I'm working with fur, when I'm skinning, but I always start with a primary knife. That's kind of what I'm calling it. It's basically going to be the knife that I start out with and the knife that I use for all of the critical cutting. It is going to be my sharp knife. And so you can use one knife for all of your fur skinning. That's kind of what most people, I think, do. But for me, I found that if I split things apart and I use different knives for different parts of the process, I can save a lot on sharpening, and it seems to be more efficient for me. So I use two main knives for most of my skinning work. The primary knife is going to be a sharp one. This one is a Havalon Piranha. The Havalon family of knives, they have all kinds of different models, but basically what they are is it holds a heavy-duty razor scalpel blade. So it's like a surgical type scalpel blade. It's stainless steel. This one is model 60XT. It's a really thick one, so it doesn't bend when you're cutting. The beauty of these is they're super, super sharp right out of the package. And when this thing starts to get dull, you just grab your pliers and you pull that off. You pull that blade off and you pop another one on. It's real simple. Just grab it with my Leatherman here and bend the tab out, pull it out. There's your blade. And then when you put a new one in, you just grab it with your knife and line it up, slide it in, it clips right into place. Now, these are heavy-duty blades and they can be resharpened. So they're like 50 cents a blade, maybe 60 cents if you get the Havalon brand. I found some on eBay. I was able to get like 100 blades for 40 bucks, something like that, so like 40 cents. So they're not really that bad, but if you really want to save some money, you can resharpen them. But I just use them disposable, and the way that I work it, I'll use this for all my opening cuts, and then I'll start skinning, going down, and then when I get down to the head section where you're going to do a lot of cutting against bone, then I switch over to my secondary knife, kind of the utility type knife, and that way where a lot of the wear is going on this knife and not on that 40 cent or 50 cent blade. And this knife is, I think, like 8 or 10 bucks, 6 or 8 bucks, brand new. And as you can see, this one started out, it was much, much thicker than it is now. This has been sharpened probably hundreds of times, and it's getting really, really thin. It's almost at the end of its life. But you can actually buy these really cheap. You can buy, a lot of times you can get them used from butcher shops for like $2 a piece. So they're really nice, really easy. I don't even know really who makes this one. It says Montana on the side of it, but that's all I know. So anyway, that's the secondary knife. And then there is a third knife I use. This is a beaver skinning knife. You can get these at trapping supply companies. And this one was actually handmade by a guy named Jack Whitman in Idaho. And he is kind of a legendary guy in the trapping industry, in the trapping world. He spent a bunch of time up in Alaska. He's a really good wolf trapper, marten trapper. But he now, in his retirement, makes a lot of these out of used sawmill blades. So this is actually an old sawmill blade, and it's shorter than the traditional beaver knife, but I really like it. Works for me. So the beaver knife is one with a rounded tip. It doesn't have a sharp tip like these knives, and so it allows you, as you're skinning beaver, a lot of times your knife, the way you're going around the beaver's body and you're opening them up because they're case skinned and you kind of fold things open and you just keep cutting around, you end up spending a lot of time with the tip of the knife down right up against the pelt. And if you do that with a sharp tip pointed knife, it's really easy to cut a hole in the pelt. And so by using this style of knife, you can get a lot more aggressive and you don't have to worry about making holes. So that's my third knife. I'm going to save this knife for fleshing tools. I'll talk about that a little later. Fourth thing we want to have is a sharpener. So a lot of people, especially more traditional old timers, will use a very simple whetstone, just a flat piece of stone, and you just kind of give it a little bit of oil and just run the knife over it and sharpen it. That works. I don't really, I never seem to get a perfect edge doing that for some reason. I'm just not that good at it. But you could go all the way from using a stone to using an electric sharpener or anything in between. This is somewhere in between. This is Smith's brand knife sharpener, and it's kind of a combination knife and scissor sharpener, but we're just going to use the knife part, and there's a coarse side and a fine side. And this one's a little unique in that you don't, like the fine thing is just pretty standard. You know, you've got two pieces of sharpening material and you just run the knife through them. But for the most part, what I'm using, because I'm making this blade wicked dull, is I'm using the coarse side, and what this allows you to do is you hold the knife sharp side up down against a hard surface, usually the table, and then you run this down through the knife. And so you can get, this is two carbide blades that are in a V shape, and you really get a good bite on this, and you can get this thing sharp. You can really shave off a lot of metal and get a good sharp edge quick. So I just take this, and you can hear that. I can feel that steel shavings coming off the knife, and we got a nice sharp edge ready to go again, wicked sharp. Now, and you can also go and get it even sharper with the fine, but I really haven't noticed a difference. I don't even bother using the fine. I just do 4 or 5 swipes with the coarse sharpener, and off I go. Okay, the next step we're going to want a skinning gambrel. And so some items, like obviously beaver, you don't need a gambrel. The beaver's going to be laying on the table while you're skinning it open. Muskrat, I usually don't use a gambrel for muskrat. Sometimes I do, but a lot of times I'll just put one of the feet in the bench vise and just make my cuts that way and peel the pelt off, just because it's they just go so quick that you don't really need it on a gambrel. It's almost as much time to hang it up as it takes to skin it. But this, for most, like marten, fisher, fox, coyote, I'm using a skinning, or raccoon, I'm using a skinning gambrel. This is the Keith Winkler style gambrel. Actually, it says Sterling System on the top. This is a really good one. It's my favorite. There's all kinds of models. You can just get a piece of steel, like the deer skinning gambrels that they make. You sell it like Cabela's and Walmart, where it's just like a steel triangle with a couple of points on the end, and you stick that through the legs, hang upside down and pull down while you're skinning. That's like the most basic. They actually make a new one that is a newer model that's kind of like a piece of flat steel with a V on each end. And it's like it comes down to a point where you just kind of hook the leg in on each side, and it's supposed to hold them in pretty good. I think it's a pretty good design, but I just haven't used it before, so I can't say anything about it. But this works good. They make these with chains with hooks on the end to hook through the tendon or the foot or whatever. But this one I really like. It's very similar to chains to like pull calves. If you've ever been in the, if you've ever seen people in the cow-calf operations on farms where you have to pull a calf, you got to get a chain around the foot as the foot's kind of coming out of the backside of the mom, and you got to pull. This works the same way. you run the chain through the eye, the big loop on the end, and you make yourself a loop and then tighten down against whatever you want to hold. And so that works super good, easy on, easy off. You know, you got them tightened down on your loop, and then you just pull things loose and everything kind of falls back out of place. So it works good. The other thing, this has a swivel on the top, so you can be spinning the animal around, cutting different spots, and keep spinning it and swiveling. And so you don't have to worry about the chain getting bound up or having to spin back the opposite direction. You can just work whatever way is comfortable for you, and you won't even notice that you don't have any issues with getting twisted up. I put an S hook on top, on the swivel on the top, and I run a chain from the ceiling. I actually have a S hook on the end of the chain to go into a hook on the ceiling, and then I just hook into different parts of the chain to adjust the height that my animal is at. And so I start off, this thing's going to be pretty low as I'm working on the the legs, and as I peel the pelt down the body, I'm going to hook this back up higher so I can work more like right in front of me. I don't have to be working down really low. So that's a typical gambrel setup. You can also have it set up on like a pulley. Those work really nice, where you can just kind of release it and cinch it back down, get and set different heights pretty easily. Variety of different ways. Some people have them set up on electric winches, so they can actually work a system where they can, on really hard animals like coyotes, they can use the electric winch to help pull that pelt off as well. Okay, anytime you're working with dead animals, especially wild animals, you want to have protective gloves. Very, very important. These animals could potentially carry rabies. They could carry other diseases, parasites, whatever. So I always have disposable gloves. These are powder-free vinyl exam gloves. There's always seems to be a different brand. I pick them up on Amazon or eBay, but I try to get, find the size that works well for you. I use size large, and I get plenty. There's 100 gloves in this box. It's not really that expensive. And if I start to get a rip or something in them, I just pull them off, put a new pair on, put a new glove on, and make sure my hands are always protected for that. Now, when I'm fleshing, sometimes I don't bother with gloves, but anytime I'm skinning, anytime I'm working on the animal, I want to make sure I've got gloves. Moving on to, we have a couple of interesting little tools that if you haven't trapped or skinned fur before, you're not familiar with, but these are the tail stripper and the tail zipper. So these are used for removing and skinning out the tail on the fur bearer. This is just a simple plastic tail stripper. These are pretty cheap, like $2-3 a piece, maybe 5 or 6 at the most. They do make them in aluminum for like really heavy duty long-term use. But I lose stuff all the time, so I got 3 or 4 of them hanging around on the shelf here. But this has 2 holes, and basically you start skinning the tail out a little bit. I did a video on this recently that you can check out, and you just kind of clamp this around the base of the tail where you've already skinned it out. You grab on and you pull the tail through it, and so it holds the fur, the skin in place as you pull the tailbone and meat out, and it allows you to get that free. And then you've got a tail there that's hollow in the middle. You need to split that open so it's exposed to the air and can dry out and doesn't rot. That's where the tail zipper comes in. You just hook this onto the top, the base of the tail, and this plastic guard keeps it from cutting all the way through the tail like you would with just a knife. If you run a knife blade, if you took this knife and just ran it down the tail, I've done it before, trust me, that'll half the time will cut through the backside of the tail, and then you got a big open slit in your tail, and when that gets dressed, a lot of times the tail's just gonna fall off. So you just run this will protect that from happening, and this inside is a razor blade, and just zips right down and splits that wide open, good to go. All right, fur comb, fur brush. Now, these you can get by without them if your fur is really nice and clean. If you're like with raccoons, coyotes, foxes, even beavers at times, a lot of times you need to go through them with a fur comb and get the burrs out, especially like burdocks and other stuff that gets caught in the hair. The reason for that is if you don't do that, if you don't run a comb, this is like a pretty coarse tooth comb, and it's basically just designed for getting those large objects out of the fur. If you don't do that and you get that skinned out and you get it on the fleshing board and you start fleshing, as soon as your fleshing knife hits one of those burrs, instead of sliding over the top of the skin, it's going to cut right through it and you're going to put a hole in the pelt. Don't ask me how I know. So that comb is typically for removing burrs and doing that stuff before fleshing. And then after you're done, you get the fur skinned out, flesh stretched, dried, ready to go. Before you send it to market, especially like your long hair furs or your furs that are going to be skinned fur out, stretched fur out, you can tidy things up, make them look nice by getting a lot of the smaller stuff out by using this more of a fur brush. It's going to remove a lot of smaller stuff. You don't want to get too aggressive with the brush because you can remove a lot of hair, maybe more hair than you would want to, but it's pretty good for the kind of fine tuning of things. Now we've got the thing skinned out and we're going to move on to getting it on the fleshing beam. You can use a variety of different fleshing beams. A fleshing beam is basically just a wooden beam, a wooden object that you lay the fur over top of so that you can flesh it and get the fat and meat off of. It's not always wooden. You can actually make them out of PVC as well, but most of the times people are going to use wood beams. Typically what you're going to have, this is going to be for like your fox, coyote, raccoon, and as you get into animals like beaver, a lot of times you're going to have a wider beam, like 7 inches wide for beaver. That's pretty typical. This one is 5 inches wide. For me, I use this one size beam for everything. I use it for everything that can fit on it. Everything basically from a fox and up. Sometimes a fox is a little small to fit on this. But raccoon, coyote, fisher, beaver, otter, I do it all on this just because, number one, when I started out, I didn't want to buy a bunch of different size beams. And number two, I learned on this and it worked for me. So, hey, whatever works, works. You can mount this up against a wall. You can put it on a stand. Problem with having it on a stand is these take up a lot of space in a small area like a fur shed. So it can be kind of a pain. A couple of guys I know have mounted them to where they fold out from the wall, and that is really, really slick. And so you can have it so it's going to be fixed up against the wall, but then it folds up out of the way when you're not using it. I just lean mine against the corner of the wall and lean against it with my body and just flush that way. On my smaller animals like marten, mink, weasel, muskrat, I'm going to use a small wooden stretcher. You could use a special beam that's thicker than this, but this works just fine. And on the smaller animals, I'm just using a butter knife anyway. They make a pelt scraping tool that you can use. I thought I had one, but I haven't seen it around. But I don't bother with it. I just use a standard butter knife. I took it from the kitchen at the house and maybe took a couple of them while my wife wasn't looking. But anyway, yeah, I just use this to scrape the small stuff, and then I'll use my sharp knife if I need to make a few cuts. But when we get to the bigger animals, you're gonna need a big fleshing knife to take care of those. And this is gonna be the knife, the type of fleshing knife, the two-handed fleshing knife that you're gonna want to use for these larger animals: beaver, otter, fisher, coyote, maybe fox a little bit. You're gonna want to use one of these, skunk, especially the animals that have a lot of fat and a lot of meat that you got to get off of them. This one is a Necker 600. This is my favorite knife. Just again, I learned on this one and it worked well for me. I got used to it. I really like it. This one's pretty similar. It's a Freedom brand, a little bit different. This one's actually a little bit bigger size. It's probably similar to like the Necker 700 maybe, more typical for beaver. But any one of these is going to work. I've got a few others that are, I take that back. Not any one of these is going to work. Any one like this that you're going to pay between $50 and $80 for is going to work great. These have two different sides. Both sides are used. So the outside is going to be a sharp edge, and I sharpen that with an ice auger blade sharpener. I don't know, or also called like an Alaskan ulu sharpener. It's very much like this. It's got a specific angle to it. Instead of having like a V shape, it's like one side is straight and the other side is at an angle. And that's how you want this to be sharpened. You want to have the side that's going to be right up against the pelt to be straight, and the side away from the pelt to be angled down. And the reason for that is you want to be cutting. If you have that lower side angled up, you're not going to be able to get the right angle, and you're going to have to face the angle down toward the pelt in order to actually get it to cut. And guess what's going to happen? You're going to cut a hole in the pelt. So this is your sharp side. It's used for the really hard stuff, especially on the thick gristle areas on beaver. The inside is going to be your dull side, and this is used for pushing. So this is used for cutting. This is used for pushing. So you're going to push the easy stuff like this. You're going to get in the hard stuff. You're going to make some cuts like this on this side, and then you're going to flip it back around and push the stuff that you got off the pelt. So that's pretty simple. One thing I will caution you against, if you're going to save money on anything, do not do it with a fleshing tool. I have seriously bad experience with this. When I first fleshed my first beaver, I used the $12.95 fleshing knife that was like 2 wooden handles and really short, and it's a really cheap steel, and you can never really get an edge on it, and they're just horrible. You're just pushing. I must have worked on that first beaver for an hour, and I never got anywhere, and I just about gave up on it. It was pathetic. So you want to use a good quality fleshing knife. It's going to pay for itself, trust me. There's a bunch of different models you can try too. There's some really high-end stuff you can mess around with that. But I would recommend a Necker or a Caribou. Those are both two really good brands. I have an overview of fleshing knives that I wrote on trappingtoday.com. You can check that out. Just Google search for fleshing knife review and you'll find that. But the other ones, Weeby has one that's fairly popular, and Ensemble brand from PCS Outdoors has one that's popular. When you're working against a fleshing beam and you're leaning against it, you got a bunch of mess going on, you're going to want a skinning apron. This is a heavy-duty skinning apron, and this one's made for beaver in particular, and it has 2 layers. I have another one back there that only has 1, but this has an extra layer in the area that you're going to be leaning against the pelt, and you're going to have a lot of grease and a lot of meat, and a lot of fat. It's just going to be disgusting. You don't want to get that all over your clothes. You do it once and you go inside the house and your wife kicks you back out of the house. You don't have to spend the night in the fur shed. So this is really good, good to have. They're not too bad of an investment. If you get a good one, it's going to last quite a long time. It's just pretty simple. You just have this string that you put around your neck, and then you tie these 2 ends. You run them around your back and you tie it on the back side, and you have your apron. Okay, finally the last 2 things we have are our stretchers and our push pins. Push pins are pretty self-explanatory. You're going to use these to put attach the pelt to a board. If you're using a wooden stretcher, that's how you're going to stretch your pelt out into the right shape. If you're doing beavers, you're going to nail them on. I don't know if you noticed, I got one back there. I got several of them here. They're going to be nailed onto a piece of plywood in the right shape. And there you're going to use some of these small, thin nails. I just picked them up at Lowe's. I can't even remember what they are exactly. I think these are like 1.25 inches long, and they're pretty thin so that you don't make a bunch of big holes in your plywood. So that's pretty simple. As far as stretchers, there's basically two directions you can go. You can go with wood stretchers or wire stretchers. And traditionally, it's been kind of long-held understanding in the fur industry that wooden stretchers result in a higher quality pelt, end product-wise. And the reason for that is because with wood, you can control the shape and form of that pelt when you get it on the stretcher, and while it's drying, you can do a lot of different things. You can make sure that that's tacked down evenly, that's pinned down evenly to the right size. The width can be fine-tuned. There's a number of different things that just they come out better on wood. However, in this new era of fur market, fur prices that we're in, the prices are just so terribly low that that premium that you got for stretching with wood has essentially gone away. Fur has become such a utility product that it almost doesn't matter anymore at this point whether you stretch with wood or wire. If you're looking to take a lot of pride in what you produce, you probably still want to use wood. You're going to take more time. You're going to get it pinned up just perfectly. Everything's going to look great, but unfortunately you're not going to get much more money for it in the market. There are some exceptions, but like, bobcats, for instance. With the wooden stretchers, you can have just like a standard one piece, like this mink stretcher or this muskrat stretcher, or you can have two-piece stretchers. This one is for a red fox, and this is an adjustable stretcher. It's got a wing nut here with a bolt, and you just adjust it in and out depending on how wide your pelt is, and then you tighten that wing nut down and it holds the width, and then you just tack down with your push pins. So those are the two different styles. And then going into the wire stretchers, there's a bunch of different sizes all the way from mink to coyote. This is a muskrat stretcher, and it's really quite simple. I mean, all you do is you pull the pelt down over the stretcher and you hook. These are hooks with some pointed ends on them, and you just puncture that through a section of the fur or a tail like you would in muskrat on each side, and you just pull that down to the proper adjustment, and off you go. You might put a clothespin on the end to keep the nose from coming around past the top, but that's very basic. I mean, as you can see, wire stretchers are really quick and easy. Just pull the pelt over, get it in place, and you're done. So time-wise, they're very good. Traditionally, muskrats have always been mostly stretched on wire. The wood wire has never been much of a difference with rats. Coyotes, I always did my coyotes on wire until recently. And raccoons, typically wire is going to be just fine. So those traditionally have been the ones, and the others, you more commonly see them on wood. But anymore, it doesn't matter. Whatever you can find, whatever works best for you, really doesn't matter. So with that, that's an overview of some of the tools that I use. You can check out that post I made, that article on trappingtoday.com for more information. And if I can get around to it, I'm going to put some links in the description of this video where you can buy some of this stuff. So you can just kind of click on that and go do your shopping if there's something that you need. All right, guys, thanks. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video.